Hey guys, so a video a day where I tried to basically go over 7 to 8 hours of work that I did that day turned out to be quite the shock to the system. So I'm realizing now I might need to get used to it somewhat gradually. So I did 2 videos in a row, then I had basically a 3-day break, which wasn't supposed to be this long, but I also had some issues with only being free to record at night, and my walls are not thick enough for me to not end up waking everyone in the house up. And part of the reason I'm producing this content is to give me the motivation to work really hard. So we'll see how it goes going forward. Maybe this time I'll get 3 or 4 videos in a row before I end up crashing out a bit. Anyway, this video might be quite long, so right away just want to say like, share, subscribe if you like this. I have a Patreon now. Like I say, I'm doing this full time because it's what I want to do, but then I have to earn money on top of that now. First thing I want to say is that I really did like this book. I would definitely recommend picking up a copy of this book. It's called Reclaiming the F Word, How We Learn to Swear by Feminism, and it's by 2 authors, Jane Caro and Catherine Fox. So first of all, you'll remember in my last video I said second wave feminism ended in the 80s. This is corroborated by this book here. But this book isn't about second wave feminism, it's about third wave feminism. It brings up the internet with reference to Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, which always reminds me of Marge Simpson's quote where she says that Woolf must have been talking about the kitchen. Marge has the most adorable internalized misogyny. She points out that feminism nowadays can often be subject to a two-pronged attack. First of all, people claiming feminism's work is done and women have it all now, and then also other people, and sometimes even the same people, saying feminism has left women feeling miserable and has hurt women. And on the subject of two-pronged attacks, she points out that women nowadays will be attacked for not going to work because it's seen as evidence against feminism, whereas if they do go to work, they can be scrutinized for not being good mothers. So in other words, be a feminist and get criticized for being a self-obsessed career woman or whatever else, which might make you want to therefore be more gender conformative, and then of course you being gender conformative is shown as evidence against feminism. So women have to prove that they want to be equal even while their drive to equality is subject to huge sexism and criticism. And then we get a brief summation of Lewis's law, which isn't referred to by that name in this book, which states that the response to a woman proclaiming feminism does itself justify the need for feminism. Now, a recurring theme brought up early is that feminists should encourage men. Now, I will speak generally about male feminists from a feminist perspective in not too long. She says that having a loving partner, even for a heterosexual feminist woman, is a good thing. They say that personally they've benefited from having a man who is willing to support and love them, and that kind of makes sense really. If you've got loads of men mostly attacking you for your feminism, then it's possibly pretty good for your sanity and self-esteem if you have found yourself a man who will support you in your feminism. And I don't think they're saying you should have a husband, but they are saying they have noticed benefits from having a husband during this period. They also express how lucky they were to have had fathers who weren't complete dicks, and it's sad to say that that is something worth noting for women, but it's not surprising, especially older women born in the 60s and 70s. Now, something that's brought up in this feminist literature, which is something I want to bring up, is something that got me banned from Against Men's Rights subreddit. And I made this claim just a few videos back. There are problems with women, and it gets pretty tiring repeating this over and over again and having to add context. But of course the genders are unequal. Of course women are inferior to men, because women are oppressed by men. How on earth could a demographic as consistently oppressed as women ever end up equal to men? And I hope it's clear from that I don't think women are inherently inferior to men or unequal to men. I think women are oppressed, which is Feminism 101, and that a group that is consistently oppressed will end up with shortcomings, which is Common Sense 101. But apparently all of that isn't enough, because even after I explain all of that, plus a quote from Simone de Beauvoir, where she says the exact same thing, I still got banned from the Against Men's Rights subreddit. Not that I'm bitter. And in this context, she talks about a man who was a feminist who said that he preferred his father to his mother. And the stated reason was basically that his mother was insane. And I think a lot of people have issues with their mums, because a lot of people's mums are genuinely fucking insane. Think about how many women we know are sexually abused, and how that number probably wasn't dissimilar when the previous generation was growing up. And a lot of people's mums were sexually abused, and a lot of those crimes were never addressed or punished, so of course you're going to get a load of depressed mothers with all sorts of issues. And then on top of that, you have the other consequences of growing up in a sexist society. So many housewives are depressed, so many women in their middle ages are going to feel like they've missed out on their full potential because they've grown up in a sexist society. So this guy basically says that he has issues with his mum, he finds his mum frustrating, not as laid back or fun as his dad, and the authors responds by saying why this guy's mum is like this, and that she didn't need to have ended up like this. In a proper feminist society, his mum could have ended up happy, fulfilled, self-confident, and he could have had a better relationship with his mum. Notice how she didn't say that his mum isn't unhappy, unfulfilled, and lacking self-confidence. Notice how she didn't say his mum isn't frustrating or agitated or no fun, because by all accounts she probably is all those things. If she was raised in a sexist, patriarchal society, as feminists would say, then she probably is really messed up mentally, and not actually a massively pleasant person. I wouldn't be. And I love my mum tremendously. I don't have mother's issues, but I don't want my wife to be like my mum. I don't want my daughter to be like my mum, because I want them to be happy. And as much as I love my mum, I must admit that a lot of my mother's character is symptomatic of having grown up in a sexist society. The reality is, I'm never going to apologise for finding my dad more fun than my mum, because my dad is more fun than my mum. Most dads are more fun than most mums, because most dads don't have to go through all the shit most mums go through. You can't set up feminism as a denial of this reality. You have to set it up as an explanation for this reality. Anyway, just wanted to say that. Something one author observes is that she found at her job she was a lot more polite than most men, saying please and thank you and sorry more than the men did. She also discusses the issues found in female friendships, especially point scoring and about the quality of your husband's job or the children's performance in school. My sister, having hung around with more mothers than me, says this is her least favourite thing mothers do. And obviously it's clear it's an issue from a feminist perspective. It's encouraging women to live through their children and their husbands, but also it's very much policing women's parenting. Female friendships can often police women's behaviour. Women, including mothers, can be often the biggest gender police. You can see this with looks a lot, because a lot of the time men find women's obsession with hair and makeup pretty ridiculous, and the author posits most women aren't dressing up the way they do to impress men. They're doing it to fit in with other women. Now, another thing she brings up is that the way men look attractive relates principally to power and secondarily to attracting women, if that's even a second priority. So looking really buff is a lot more about power than about attracting women. Now, this is a big issue which H. Bomber guy has said a thing or two about, and more importantly, I discussed it in one of my first videos on this channel. It's a bigger issue than I have time to discuss here. One last thing they bring up on the subject of looks is the idea that men might benefit from having relatively limited clothing parameters. For example, usually I wear a tracksuit and a t-shirt. If it's smart casual, I upgrade to jeans and a t-shirt and sometimes a shirt. If it's very smart, I combine one of my Primark suits with one of my Primark shirts with one of my Primark ties. And of course, you can have a variety of shirts and you can have a variety of suits. You can have black, light grey, dark grey, shades of blue, etc. But women have way too much choice, and it's a pointless and tedious choice to have to make. But they have to make it. Them's the rules of gender, and they're not just that easy to just shake off. There's an obligatory thing about raunch culture and how educated women are parading their sexuality around in front of men isn't empowering. She references Ariel Levy, of course, and I would recommend you read Ariel Levy if you want to understand raunch culture. There's a brief mention of abortion, with a statistic that crime rates went down 20 years after Roe v. Wade, and that this drop occurred earlier in states that legalized abortion earlier. Now, this basically shows that forcing women to have kids they don't want or can't afford causes bigger issues for society. I don't want to talk about abortion too much. Again, you know the drill. Big statistics, if true though. Now, basically there's a massive chunk about women in jobs versus women in family and all that jazz. So I'm going to try and summarize it all quite briefly, but first of all I'm going to have some water. I'm talking so fast today. A big reason why women struggle in jobs is because they do 80% of housework. In fact, if you want a good statistic, women and men do 10 hours and 7 hours of housework a week when single, respectively. This jumps up to 25 hours for women after marriage on average, and down to 2 hours by men on average. When discussing women's lives generally, housework and these are mentioned, but not so much for men. The fact this chapter even exists shows there's an issue. Now, work. In the last 20 years, the number of middle-aged women in paid work rose from 52% to 76%. There was a belief in the idea that there would be a critical mass where equality would just come naturally, but this just seems to be increasingly unlikely. However, the fact that this number does grow suggests it's not natural that women don't work. In a more sexist society, they do less paid work. In a less sexist society, they do more. Of course, there is a pay gap, it's a fact. Women on the first year out of uni earn 80% of what men do. This goes down to 69% after 10 years. That's data from 2007, by the way. The pay gap can often sneak in with bonuses. Women are often hesitant to ask for pay rises, and they suggest is that it's because women are taught it's better to be liked than to be valued. Also, it's more uncomfortable to assert yourself when you're surrounded by members of the opposite gender, and a lot of the time women who are very money driven are considered bitches and make people uncomfortable. It's unsurprising that in money driven executive jobs the pay gap is 58%, so part of the issue seems to be that women don't care that much about what they earn. They aren't money driven. Now this often pushes them into marginalized part-time work. For example, I am not very money driven, which is why my main job is doing this for free, and I do the smallest possible amount of part-time work to sustain myself. But in addition to not caring about what they earn, a lot of women are a lot less scrupulous about what they spend. Women are bigger consumers than men in Western countries. They are targeted with marketing that plays on insane internalized misogyny, and feminism is on the side of sanity, saying, don't be such a huge consumer. Now, a lot of men think that women hardly earning any money but spending a lot is proof of how lucky they are. However, Freedom points out that women are only one husband away from welfare, and in fact, even without alimony, women never recover financially after a divorce, whereas men typically recover after 10 years. In fact, women are often disadvantaged in court because they don't want to appear evil or live up to the stereotype of trying to bleed their husband dry, despite the fact they were supporting their husband and running large parts of the husband's lives while he was free to earn all that money. Now, the obvious issue here that needs to be brought up is that women work a lot. It just so happens that their work is largely unpaid. In fact, it's negatively paid because it often causes you to get paid less, even for the paid labor that you do. You would actually be paid more money for the same amount of labor in work if you weren't doing, in addition, unpaid labor as a mother. Now, the problem is that, of course, that women don't do this unpaid labor to be paid. And the author concedes it's hard to imagine how much a system of paid spousal and maternal labor could work. But what we should do is acknowledge that the work done does have value, even if it isn't directly recompensed. Because, of course, we do need women to do the work they do, or else we'll die out. We need children, we need clean houses and food, and other stuff that women can often tend to dominate. Now, part of the issue here is love. Women do these things out of love, and it's often uncomfortable to phrase it as an economic arrangement. And the truth is, it can be a sensible economic arrangement. If a man is earning a lot more money for his time, then it makes sense for women to take time out of their work, where they earn less money, to prepare the man's meals so he can spend more time at his work earning more money. Obviously, works the same way if the genders are reversed. But this economic arrangement is clearly an exchange, not just the man giving the woman loads of money to spend. The other issue with love is that it's easier to argue against a politician's sexism or your boss's sexism than it is to argue against your husband's sexism, especially if he doesn't even realize he's sexist. The other issue is motherhood. The first problem here is that despite motherhood being hard work, women can't really admit it's kind of a shitty job with the sleep deprivation and the monotony, because they're supposed to love their children, which means if they say to a man, well, I was taking care of the children, and they try to pass that off as labour, they run the risk of being called a shitty mother. God forbid they take the children to daycare instead. Women are often told that they are perfect and the moral centre of the family, but this often means that they incur the duty of holding this family together in order to affirm the goodness and righteousness they've been lauded with. Of course, encouraging women not to live through their children and have their children serve as advertisements for their parenting might well be pretty good for children. And also, encouraging fathers to engage children more might be good. In fact, marriage and motherhood might well have a radicalizing effect, according to the authors. Divorce rates suggest that right now, women's freedom, to the extent it exists, is incompatible with the modern family, or the traditional family. Divorce rates will go up as women become more free, because the family is a shitty arrangement for free women. Also, apparently feminists have better sex. I also heard Christians have better sex. Funnily enough, also 2 reasons why someone might not watch porn, almost as if porn ruins sex. Also, brief mention of changing surnames. Successful women tend to keep their surnames, which kind of shows how inherently degrading taking someone else's surname is. Like, if I married a famous woman, she probably wouldn't go by my surname, because she'd be known by her current surname. So, if success makes you want to keep your own surname, what does that say about the practice of taking someone's surname in the first place? Now, about kids. One author says their kids have the father's surname, the other author it's double-barreled. Obviously, you can't just keep double-barreling forever, but that's a discussion for another time. She talks about religion, but the first point she points out is that in communist Romania, under a guy whose name I can't pronounce, women were basically forced to have children, and apparently 46% of modern Romanians would vote for this guy again. I think it's pronounced Ceausescu. Then she mentions Christianity. Used to be Anglicans didn't support anaesthetic because Eve was supposed to suffer in childbirth. But then the head of Anglicanism was a woman at the time, Queen Vic, and she decided it was fine. Also, some Anglican bishop in Australia accused a 14-year-old girl of seducing a priest when the priest raped the 14-year-old girl. Now, she talks about Islam. And I think this bit of the book is really important, because a lot of anti-feminists think feminists are too soft on Islam, and they're right. Now, I have defended Islam on this channel. I do think Islamophobia is a thing, but also we have a serious problem with Muslims in the West and how they treat women. One example, a Muslim man raped a non-Muslim woman in Australia and claimed it was because she was not conforming to Islamic standards of dress, and he was backed up by an Australian Muslim sheikh. She attacks cultural relativism and the idea that you're called a racist for attacking Islam. She says Islamic countries are moving backwards. Now, it's worth noting that implies that Islamic countries can be good. What are they moving backwards from? Well, they used to be more egalitarian, but they're pretty fucking shit right now. If we judged Islamic societies by the same standards we judge Christian societies, we'd go mental. If you are a feminist, you can't be silent about Islam because it fucks your integrity to shit if you don't acknowledge the Sharia law gangs in London running around calling women sluts. And they concede in the book, being born in a Western country for a woman is winning the lottery, relatively speaking. Right at the beginning of the book, they discuss how lucky they are to have been raised in feminist families and progressive society. And they're very quick to point out that this doesn't mean you can just say, well, it's worse in other countries, therefore it's fine. None of this is to excuse the West, but we need to acknowledge that the West is a fucking paradise compared to most Muslim countries. Because if we're not acknowledging that, we're not acknowledging sexism. Part of acknowledging sexism is being able to acknowledge varying levels of sexism. She makes the point that feminism often involves 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. Completely coincidentally, she references Sisterhood Interrupted, which is the last book I read. She mentions post-feminism, which I cover in my review of that book. She talks about Paris Hilton suing for half the profits of the sex tape posted of her online. They talk about how this is positive, but I disagree, because the guy who posted that stuff online without her consent was still fucking immoral and should have been arrested. And the societal effects of that type of content does harm women. She then references a book that I've started reading today, again, completely coincidentally, which is insane. I already had planned on reading that book today, so looking forward to that. She talks a bit about how incredible it was that Wollstonecraft could see sexism where no one else could, and basically sets up for an argument about the wrong side of history and how we as feminists should remember we are identifying injustice that others do not see as just as feminists before us were. She talks a bit about Hillary Clinton, but that doesn't matter. This book was written in 2007 to 2008, by the way. One thing she says at the end is that you shouldn't blame yourself for internalized misogyny and all that stuff. I don't know if I agree with this, but I'm not discussing it because my throat hurts, and it's a really long book. Anyway, I've been King Alfarazon. Like, share, subscribe, Patreon. Don't take my word for it, think for yourselves.